Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere in dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
Everyone, welcome to the Stoa. I'm Peter Limberg, the steward of the Stoa. The Stoa is a place for us to cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of this very moment. And today we have Jillian Richardson, the author of, and she's waving right there in case you want to determine who that is. And then she's the author of the Unlonely Planet, How Healthy Congregations Can Change the World. And she's the founder of something called the Joy List, which has a mission to make New York City and probably the world at this point a less lonely place. And it's just like a very timely kind of, moment to have Jillian on, because we've been talking about loneliness a lot here at the Stoa, and we're sort of doing what she's writing about and doing in herself in New York, is just kind of ameliorating loneliness through building community, or what us cool meta kids like to call communitas. So what we're going to do today is Jillian and I are going to have a conversation for about 10, 15 minutes. And if you have any questions throughout, just start throwing them in the chat right now. I'll call on you, unmute yourself, ask your question to Jillian. If you'd like me to read it on your behalf, because we'll go on YouTube, just indicate that in the chats and then I'll read on your behalf. So I think that's everything. I'll allow everyone to unmute themselves. So welcome to the Stoa, Jillian.
So much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. And as I was just saying to you, I'm so curious about all of you in this community as well. That's just how my brain works. So I'm excited to drop in and see what all this is about.
Beautiful. Yeah, and feel free to ask us any questions that come alive for you as well. You asked me a difficult one before we let people in. I didn't have an answer, so I was trying to get around it. Yeah, so is there anything maybe for people coming in who don't know anything about your work or your book, is there anything you would like to frame the conversation before I start asking more specific questions?
Yeah, I think I'll just say kind of the biggest question that people ask me when like I'm at a party or something and they're like, oh, what do you do? I give them one of two answers. I either say I study loneliness, or I say I help people make friends. Like those are kind of the two options. And then they typically ask, why? And it's just because it's the thing that I've struggled with the most in my life. And it's kind of like what you would call the wounded healer. Like the places where I felt the most pain in my own life is where I feel the most qualified to help people with what they're struggling with. And really, when I moved to New York City after college, didn't really know anyone. I had this moment where like I kind of knew one guy in the city and we were gonna go out and I was all excited, like my first night as an adult in New York City, and he totally ghosted on me. And I had no one to hang out with. And just the feeling in my body in that moment of I'm alone here, I have no support, I don't know people, was terrifying. And I kind of vowed to myself I wasn't going to let anyone make me feel that way again, like make me feel that way again. And just dedicated a year of my life to really finding who my people are, because I realized I'd never really felt at home in a group of friends, and like the people around me lifted me up and helped me become a better version of me. I was a comedy kid in college, and so was like in the sketch comedy improv world, was like the president of my school's improv group. And looking back, I realized we were all kind of using humor as a way to denigrate ourselves and kind of take each other down a notch. And it wasn't very kind. And I wanted to find people who were kinder than that. And when I started to find those spaces, intersected with when Donald Trump was elected. And so my newsletter actually started November in 2016, because there was a juxtaposition of feeling like, for me, things were hopeless. I heard my friends saying things like, people are bad, I can't trust anyone anymore. like things are hopeless, that kind of thing, with at the same time being around the most loving, inspiring people I'd ever met. And I wanted to let people know that in New York City, every day of the week, there's these beautiful spaces where you can go and be in community and connection. And what happened then, and then I'll wrap up my story, is that people started coming up to me once I released this newsletter and being like, thank you for sharing how lonely you felt. I feel that way, and I thought I was the only one. I didn't know other people felt that way. I started getting emails from strangers who didn't even live in New York City. Like, I just got divorced and I'm with my kids and I don't know how to meet people. And like, you've given voice to my experience. And the more I learned, and as I decided to write a book on loneliness, that it's such a common human experience that we feel such deep shame around, and that we really just need to talk about it and voice it and share how we can step out of our own loneliness if we want to, because sometimes loneliness can be a really beautiful, powerful feeling. And that's my whole deal. That's what I've dedicated my life to, is just creating community and connection, because we really, really need it, especially right now. So that's who I am. Hi.
Yeah, there's so many threads that I want to take you down. Where do you think that shame comes from?
I mean, so for me, and this is a thing I've discussed very publicly, but I come from a pretty dysfunctional family. And if you've been in any sort of 12-step group, or seeing in the chat, me too, we're like, yeah, when we really look at it, most of us come from dysfunctional families. A lot of people just don't talk about it. But the 3 rules of a dysfunctional family is don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. Like, don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. Those are kind of the 3 pillars. And so for me, since feeling disconnected is tied with sadness, it's tied with kind of like maybe anger, like these feelings that are not acceptable in a lot of households to talk about. You kind of just shove that down and put on a smile, be a good girl, everything's okay. There's nothing but pleasantness in here. I think that's where the shame comes from.
And I'm curious, for whatever reason, the question of a gender divide came up to mind when I was reading some of your stuff. Do you think women experience loneliness in a different way than men do?
Ooh, okay. I'm just gonna answer this off the cuff. This isn't something I've actually talked about very much, but what just immediately popped to the top of my mind was that in my experience of working with women, the loneliness can come from not feeling like their emotional selves are fully expressed. That in my own experience, it was realizing I had no place to express rage or grief or like these deep emotions that make up part of who I am, that there were not safe spaces for me to share those feelings. And so I, as a person, did not feel fully expressed. And I'm in a women's group now where that is the point, is to be able to, it's kind of like community therapy with each other, where we're always expressing these things that socially we're told to not express a lot of the time. And with men, I think that is also true of your full emotional self isn't expressed. There's maybe a little different flavor of, like, I know with a lot of guys, there's a difficult time with even asking men to hang out in the first place. And really, this is just a thing with people, but this is what I've heard from women I've worked with. They'll say something along the lines of like, can you just tell my husband that it's okay to ask a guy to go get tacos with him? Like, that there's a block of even asking guys to hang out with you in the first place, in very broad strokes. And also I'm seeing in the comments, grown men don't cry. This is, I call myself like the #1 lady advocate of men's work. Like, I refer men to men's circles and men's groups so often because I see what happens when men do not have the support of emotionally mature men. Like that's where so much physical and emotional violence comes from, is when these healing or these patterns of abuse are not broken. And so with men, for the people who are male identifying in the room, I super recommend a documentary called The Work, which is by my friend Gethin Aldis.
So good, that documentary.
You know it?
Yeah, I watched it.
Have you talked about it in this group before?
Not yet.
Okay. Just quickly, it is about a men's group inside of Folsom Prison, where it's half men from outside of prison, half men in prison. The documentarian is a man named Gethin Aldis, who also, he lives in New York City. And it's the one time a year where these prisoners get a space to express what's going on with them emotionally. And the prisoners are actually, or like the men who are in prison are kind of the mentor figures for the men from outside of prison. And it's a really, really painful but gorgeous depiction of how much emotional gunk people are holding inside, and what happens when you're in a space where you really can just let it rip. Like, it's gut-wrenching. Like, it's a very intense documentary to watch, and at the same time it's just so moving to see, like, wow, when these men trust each other and support each other, look at what they can do. Like, it's more work than you could do in years with a therapist, because, at least in my opinion, it's healing done in community with other men. And the same applies to women. When you know that you can trust women and you can show these things, that's more than you can just do with one person. Like, it's a whole different type of healing.
Yeah. And then that's what I echo those thoughts of that documentary. It was really good. And so I've done a lot of like that similar encounter work and somatic stuff and kind of psychotherapeutic work. And I feel like I can have good homosocial relationships with men. But I do think,
I've never heard that before.
it's not my term, it's a technical meta term. I do think there's like a what they call man box, with male homosocial relationships, where you can't show weakness, you can't show this, which is a barrier, which engenders loneliness. But one thing that I'm getting to realize, that a lot of women have trouble making friends with other women. Like, my wife is jealous of my male friends and how we can just bond and talk in like kind of a free associative way. And there seems to be barriers there. So I'm just want to double click on that. If there's any truth or any resonance there in that statement.
I like that. I want to double click on it. This is why I love joining different communities, because I get to hear like the lingo that's totally common for everyone. And then I'm like, I've literally never heard someone say that in my life. So cool.
I should apologize in advance before there's so much lingo that you're walking into.
It's so cool. I think it can definitely be true. And like the women's group that I'm a part of is called Woman Within, and we have kind of the initiation into your women's circle, which is every week or every other week, is a weekend long experience that I super recommend for post-COVID times. But a gift of that is being able to hear the struggles of a lot of different types of women at a lot of different stages in their lives. And I think hearing a woman so openly just say, I don't think I can trust other women. Like, I don't trust other women. And it wasn't a thought I had ever consciously had. And yet, because of experiences like with my sister, with my mother, realizing it's definitely there. It's not a thought I've consciously thought before. There's a really great book. I love that this is a space where it feels like I can just go super deep and nerdy on this. There's a book called The Heroine's Journey, which I really recommend for anyone who's female identifying and also considers yourself kind of like a father's daughter, like someone who you really want to please your dad. Like, there's a lot of like, you're his star, you're his golden child, which is totally me. And it really sheds a painful, uncomfortable amount of light on like why you might have perfectionist tendencies, why you might gravitate more towards male friends than female friends, and like the healing cycle of that. It's gorgeous and also totally not a light read. So warning on that, but it's really powerful.
That's cool. Should be a Stoa session, that journey.
So cool, because she's arguing that the hero's journey is different than the heroine's journey. Like the hero's journey is much more masculine, like there's a goal and you get to it and it's over, and the heroine's journey is much more cyclical, like a death and rebirth cycle. And it's a really great look at like, oh wow, this story structure that we just I just felt was true, like that's what it is. There's a completely different way of looking at it that's more feminine leaning. You see someone in the comments being like, over and over. It just keeps going forever.
Right. So something else I wanted to circle back to when you mentioned your improv, I think, or acting experience. And it's funny because Keith Johnstone, kind of the pioneer of improv, is coming in tomorrow at the Stoa to do a talk. And I spoke with him on the phone last week, and I have an improv background as well. And I didn't really I loved improv, but I didn't vibe with the people in improv, because when you hang out with them for a beer, it's just like they're just competing each other with jokes. You know, it's like, can we just have like a real conversation? It's like, they got to say something funny, they got to say something funny. And then the whole kind of the sketch mentality, because you're kind of hunting for the laugh, and then you get kind of like, it's like a supernormal stimuli, you get addicted to it, and then you just kind of mold your character around that. And it was funny that Keith was, say that again?
Super normal stimuli.
It's sort of like a display or some kind of device that captures an evolutionary adaptive thing and then heightens it. So like porn is a supernormal stimuli, for example, or laugh tracks in comedy shows is a supernormal stimuli. Anyway, so Keith Johnson was like making fun of this too when I was talking on the phone, which is quite awesome. And so why I mentioned that is that there seems to be like a narcissistic component there. It's like pointing the finger back on me when you're doing that. And that's sort of like anti-community. So I'm curious if you can tease out some of the characteristics between these sort of anti-communities and what you're cultivating there with actual community.
Yeah, well, I mean, even for me, someone who wrote a book about community, there's just so many individualistic tendencies in me because of the culture I was raised in, like living in America, that it's still very counterintuitive for me to act in community. Like it's such a muscle, and I feel like that muscle for me has so deteriorated during this time of COVID, because I tend to like to build community by connecting people and creating gatherings in person. And I don't really get to do that right now as much. There's a postcard on my fridge that I'm looking at that a friend sent me that says how to build community. And then it's like this list of things. And it's just so many actions that people don't do, like talking to your neighbor, making food and giving people in your community extra, like working in a community garden, just like lists of things like that. It's probably like 50 things. And it's really tragic that we live in a culture where there's so much hustle and grind that I was about to say being able to contribute to your community is a luxury. I don't think that's actually true. I think it more feels like a luxury. Like, oh, if I had more time, I would totally make brownies and give some to my neighbors or like whatever. I wish I had a better understanding of like capitalism and its impact on individualism, because I would have incorporated it more into my book, but that's just not my expertise so much.
And so when it comes to like the practical aspects, like with the joy list and the things that you're doing, so what are the steps you have taken and then are you taking to build community?
To build community. Well, it's funny because But I'm so aware of the irony of everything that I do that my newsletter is to help people find their community. I would not argue that my newsletter is a community whatsoever. Like, it is me telling other people where they can go to find their community. I would not say that my newsletter is a community. Like, if someone told me that my newsletter was their community, I would feel concerned, because it's just one woman sending a bunch of people an email every week. Like, it's not even very interactive. I used to have in-person events called the Joy List Social, where it was, the whole point was you come to this event alone so you can meet other people in New York City who want to make friends. And it was like such a sweet space, and I miss it. And I would think that was more of a community, because there's a bunch of volunteers. There's a volunteer coordinator. There's people who show up every time. There's people who want to contribute. Like, there's musicians who come. And even then, it's like, it's still a thing that if I didn't make it happen, it wouldn't happen. And so I struggle with that, of hoping that people find their network of friends, while also realizing the thing that I am offering is not really in alignment with those values so much.
And what I'm getting is you're like a community matchmaker. Like, instead of matchmaking people, you're matchmaking communities together, forming them.
Yeah, this guy sent me an email yesterday where he was like, what did he say? He said, he's like, I refer to you as community goddess. Like, you're the person who like brings people to where they need to go, but you're not the community, which I'll totally take that title.
And so the last question I'll have, then we can pivot to the chats, and feel free to ask us any questions as well. This is kind of related to Stoa too. Since COVID came online, this is the title I think I actually taught, community COVID. What is your sense of online communities forming, and how are they different from in-person communities?
Well, it's really interesting because I have a bias of being someone who's more of an ambivert. Like, I do get energy from people, but only a very specific type of person, and I need to be alone to recharge. You probably assume I'm the most extroverted person in the history of the planet, but I have a newsletter with a curated type of event because I'm only energized by a certain type of space. Like, if you drop me into a networking event with no facilitation, like, I'll want to die and run away. I see that Laura's like, yes, totally, like, relate to that. But at the same time, I'm not completely introverted. And so that's a bias that I have that I need to remember. And I've heard from people who've been organizing very consistent online spaces that they've actually had more people show up than they've ever had at their in-person events, and people are more engaged. And I think part of that is because, since we're behind our computer screens, and if I wanted to, I could just literally close my laptop and all of you disappear, potentially, depending on my personality, I could be more vulnerable, more present, more open with all of you here than I could be at an in-person gathering. And that's actually an unexpected gift for a lot of community leaders to see, like, people are even more invested. There's more types of people showing up than ever before. My church is actually the same way. More people are like attending services online than they did in person. And so that's also an interesting thing to consider. And so I notice people who are in the community space it's so easy to just shit on virtual gatherings, when there are some really beautiful positives to them at the same time.
Yeah, I feel like, since I launched Stoa, since the COVID came online, like about over 6 months ago now, my network through net playing really has increased tenfold. And it's like, you throw that strange attractor out there, and then, or that beacon, and then you find the others all over the world that I wouldn't otherwise find if I was just localized to Toronto. So it's very, very exciting. All right, so ready to pivot to some questions in the chats? Okay. Karen, you're next. You're up. Just are you getting like a Darth Vader kind of muffled voice? Okay, cool. Yeah, your audio is really weird. It's like,
Yeah, you sound like Darth Vader. It's kind of cool though.
How about now?
oh, you're good now. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, if I could control the Darth Vaderness, that'd be amazing. Um, okay, no, I was just going to say I'll read what I just have in the chat. Jillian, to what extent are the duration and the intensity of a shared experience important for developing that sense of belonging? Because you can meet somebody for 5 minutes every week, but it's not the same as maybe just going through something with somebody. And I wonder what your experience of that is with the events that you host or help with.
Thank you for that question. So I'm hearing the questions kind of like, how does the duration intensity of an event impact your sense of belonging? Is that right? Yeah, well, thinking on my own life, I feel like there in my book, I talk about there's this event I went to called Camp Grounded, which is a 4-day digital detox summer camp for adults. So it's like no technology. It's a sober space. You use like a silly name instead of your real name. My name was Lady. And even though it was only 4 days, the experience completely shifted my perception of what was possible in terms of relating, because it was the first space I'd ever been in where like it was first of all curated so much to be like, to show up here, you have to be the type of adult who is willing to not talk about work, use a silly name, be sober, not have your phone with a bunch of people in the woods. And so that was kind of a gate already. And to see like, these are adults who are so open, so playful. And I bonded with these people in 4 days more than I had bonded with friends in my entire life. Like, no joke. And so on the one hand, that's so beautiful because it was such a short amount of time and such an intensity of belonging and bonding. And yet at the same time, because there wasn't like some sort of camp grounded event series outside of the space, the friendships start to dwindle a little bit over time if there's not something that an organizer is putting together. And so I wish sometimes, like I see these gorgeous retreats that people host where like people bond and they're opening their hearts and it's like incredible. And then cut to a year later and those people aren't talking anymore because nothing has been organized to bring them together again. And I wish that more people did that, because especially retreats where very like you're really vulnerable. Like I've been in retreats where it's like our souls just got busted open and now we're just back in our lives with like no form of coming back together or checking in with each other. It feels almost irresponsible a little bit. So I wish people did a better job of that. I hope that answers your question.
Do you have any follow-up?
Also, I'm curious if you're in Ireland.
Well, I am Irish, but I'm not in Ireland at the moment, no.
Cool. My mom is Irish, so just hearing your voice makes me feel like
no, in terms of follow-up, just to say that I find something similar, that follow-up stuff is so important, because I almost feel like an event can crash things together. And then it's about just maintaining it. And recently some chats with friends have been the idea that you can actually be friends with almost anybody, because the friendship thing is almost just we've been through stuff together. So you don't need to meet, you don't have to have shared interests. You just need to have shared kind of almost memories. And my best friends are the longest ones, not necessarily the most intense events or anything like that. And the follow-up is something I think that really helps with that personally. So yeah, cool. Thank you.
Love it. Cool, thank you.
All right, Dan Feldman, you had a question.
Yes, I had a question. I was wondering if you could share your opinions and your feelings on what you believe the difference between an American style meetups based around mutual interests. For example, you know, the bowling alone idea, the bowling together in the 50s and that sort of thing, and community in Mediterranean cultures such as Greece, Italy, Spain, Portugal? Are there deeper skills and ideologies that cultivate community that are completely lacking in the US? I'm wondering if you have what your take on that is.
Yeah, like what we lose when our social culture is so around gathering around a shared interest versus just getting together for meals and hanging out. Kinda. Am I getting it?
Yeah. Well, I suspect. I mean, I lived abroad in China for many years, and many of my friends are Europeans, and I get the sense that there's a deeper substratum to particularly Mediterranean cultures that is like a glue, that it's difficult to name it. And I'm wondering if you can, and I just feel like it's completely absent in America. And
So I have not had personal experience living in other countries, but I was a consultant for this dinner series called Palabra, which is run by a guy who lived in Spain with his family for a few years and moved back to New York City and was just like, what is going on with us socially? Because he'd been in Spain where you are having 2, 3, 4, 5-hour-long meals and these just like languid conversations with people, and there's no like, let me send you a Google Cal invite for an hour-long lunch and then I need to leave. And actually now his meetings with people, he'll like only meet with people for 2 hours or more. And he's like, we're gonna have lunch and we're gonna chill. Like we're gonna really get to know each other. And that's so counter to our culture. And it's really sad. Like, I have a friend who he lived in Amsterdam for a long time, and we were on a retreat thing together, and he said how much he missed just how normal it was for people to just spend the whole day hanging out together. Like it didn't feel like a big deal. It didn't feel like a big commitment to just be like, hey man, you wanna walk over to my house and we'll just like do whatever. And to get people to do that in the United States, it's like, that feels intimidating even to me, to be like, want to just hang out all day. And I think there is something very missing of, one, being able to be okay without a plan, first of all, to be able to like engage in a conversation for that long, and to not have this, I think the problem is this anxious like monster that's hanging out that's like, you should be doing something, you should be productive. Like, that's just murdering this joy we get in being with people for long amounts of time. And so that's what I see. And it sounds like that's kind of been your experience as well. Maybe.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah. Thank you.
Of course.
All right, Kevin, you're up.
Hi, Jillian. How's it going?
I met Kevin at a festival.
Yeah, like 4 years ago.
What's up?
Crazy. How's it going? Good to see you.
You too.
Hey, I have a question for you. So a lot of your work is like connecting people with communities where they have a lot of options, right? Like New York City, you can go find a community for any little thing you want. And I think Dan's question sort of touched on this, or you sort of touched on this in your answer to Dan's question, where like, you're all hanging out around like a mutual interest. So like, I wonder what your thoughts are on the differences between like building communities where people have self-selected to be there versus strengthening a community that you are, for lack of a better term, stuck with, like your family or neighbors, or maybe you live in a small town or something like that. And if you have any advice that you've learned in your experiences that could be applied to that kind of situation versus, hey, we all, and especially like, you said like Camp Grounded people are very playful and open, and a lot of sort of, like the festival we met at, people have a sort of shared openness and vulnerability, and how would you sort of bring that environment into places where people haven't self-selected around those values?
This is a super great question. I'm like, how can you just be with people and appreciate them versus having to like always be in spaces where you know that there's a certain set of norms that like are the best for you. And honestly, this is a thing that's part of my work right now, is like, there's a big reason why like I said, I have a newsletter that's around a specific type of event, because I'm such a sensitive person that it really means a lot to me to be in a space where I feel held and like everyone's on the same page. And so for me, my work is to like just be curious about anyone. And this has come up a lot with people asking, like, I've been with the same people during COVID and I'm so sick of them. Like, I'm sick of my family, I'm sick of my partner, whatever. Like, what do I do? And the biggest learning I've had, which might sound obvious, is to just be genuinely curious about them, and that you learn new things about people when you ask them new questions. And so like an example in my life that ties to this is I was in Texas over the summer, and there were some people we were hanging out with who were like in our pod that would not have been like my first choice of friends in New York City. And I felt a lot of resistance around that and like a lot of resentment around that. And realized, first of all, these people are definitely picking up on that is my attitude towards them. Like, they probably don't want to be open and vulnerable with me if I'm like coming in all judgy about who they are. And I started asking one of the guys, we were in a car ride, about this video game that he loves, like why it was like this kind of horror video game, like why he loved it so much. And he gave me the most profound, beautiful answer about how he loves like being able to step into the lives of different women in the game, different characters, experiencing the world through that way, playing different teams. And I was just so struck by his answer to this thing that I was judging as like a waste of time and like stupid. And here he was having this gorgeous experience with it, and I just hadn't opened myself up enough to have a connected experience with him. And so I think just for anyone, if you're like me and you really love being in spaces with your people because you probably grew up in a family where you didn't feel like they were your people, you grew up in a high school where you didn't feel like you had your people, and so now as an adult you're just like holding dearly to these spaces where you can just be you, to just bring that curiosity to folks who aren't like in your little bubble universe. Because it's been really fun for me recently to be talking to people who have worldviews that are very different than mine. Like, I've been really working to talk to more people who are Republicans, who are conservative, who are Trump voters, who are way older than me. Like, those are the people I'm working to bring into my world. So I can practice that of just learning through curiosity. And so that's my offering around that question. It's so good to see you after such a long time.
I know. Hi. Yeah. Thanks. Great answer.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll have to connect later. But also, yeah, I do have a follow-up to double click, to use a Peter term. Yeah, you mentioned like, the sensitivity of, and I sort of feel the same way. I like being in a space with friends where I can sort of talk the way I want to talk. And it's difficult to sort of have that curious mindset, especially around, people family where I have history with all sorts of weird things going on, right? And one phrase that came to mind, a friend of mine who's, one of his phrases he's coined is more curious, less afraid. So I wonder what you think about, my perception is that like, there's some type of fear that prevents us from being curious.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if that's something you agree with, or what do you think is preventing you or people in general to carry that disposition of curiosity?
Yeah, I'm like wiggling because I'm so excited about this question. So like context, I just finished this 7-week course on emotional equanimity in conversations across lines of difference. Like, how can you speak to someone who sees the world very differently than you and like keep your cool and stay curious and open and not close or explode? And a big point the teacher Harry Pickens made was we often don't put ourselves with people who hold very different worldviews because we're afraid of our minds being changed. Like, that point blew my mind. Like, oh, maybe part of me unconsciously is avoiding talking to people who support Trump, talking to people who are really Republican, because I might see something about myself that I'm afraid of. I might want to shift a little bit. And if I want to do that, then who am I? And like, that's really scary. And so to like the work is to go into these conversations knowing like, this person might change the way I see things. And to not, because people sense it. If you're like holding on to your ideology so tight, like I do this when I'm going into a conversation with a Trump voter, I'm like, you're stupid and bad. No one's going to be open with me if I'm coming in with that mindset. Like, no one's going to want to share their heart with me if I'm not willing to even hear where they're genuinely coming from. And that's been a big shift for me in being with people across lines of difference, is realizing like, I'm afraid. That's what this is. I'm afraid of this person.
So how do you deal with that? The triggers, because across the political spectrum, people are getting triggered by liberals, people are getting triggered by conservatives, and then they can feel that, like a mirror neurons fire, like they feel that you don't like the person, and so how do you do that internal sort of like jiu-jitsu moves in order to not allow that to affect the interaction?
Yeah, like first of all, shout out to Harry Pickens. He's incredible. He really suggested, first of all, like we would always do this exercise of on the one hand, on the other hand, and we would like literally use our hands to show that like nothing is ever one thing. And it's such, I've been told this is like a white thing. I don't know how it's true, but maybe if I'm assuming it is, of the like very black or white, like it's either this way or it's this way and there's nothing in between. To realize that like with every bad thing that happens, that there's always something that's an on the other hand. I'm trying to think of an example and I'm feeling self-conscious. Like on the one hand, our schooling system completely messed up how we talk about Columbus. On the other hand, now we're having really rich conversations about how we need to redefine how we teach and like why that's happened in the first place. Like, yes, this shitty thing's been going on for forever, and now we have this incredible opportunity to change the narrative. Like something along those lines. So that was one thing. And we also talk about historical paradox of how, I notice I'm getting nervous while I'm sharing this, like I want to get it really right. But how if you focus on just the bad in our history, you actually like you aren't in your full truth. Like you're not really seeing clearly. Or you could be very Pollyanna-ish and like only look at the beautiful positive things in our history, and to realize like there's good and bad in everything. And to be able to hold both of those truths and have like the wisdom to hold both of those truths at the same time. Because like you see in the news, it's very tilted towards like everything is bad and on fire and exploding and like you should be screaming your head off right now. When like there are really gorgeous things happening. Like on the one hand, COVID is terrifying and it's made us realize how terrible our leadership is. on the other hand, people are supporting each other and realizing beautiful things about how their lives aren't the way they want them to be, and thinking about community support. So these are all kind of mindset things. And in terms of like actual your physical being, one big thing is just training your breath, like to be able to breathe deeply, because if anyone here has anxiety, you know, quick, shallow breathing will make our nervous systems freak out. Like we're not able to think as clearly. What Harry says is stress makes us stupid. Like the more charged up you are, the less clearly you are able to think, which totally makes sense. And so how can we train our nervous systems to be calmer in moments of conflict? And that could look like doing more breath work, meditating more, just having a constant check-in practice of how deep am I breathing right now? What's going on in my body? He would always have us on Zoom just like take breaks to yawn and stretch, because yawning calms your body down. So like feel free to yawn whenever, but we would just always just like stretch and yawn. So that's some stuff. That's some stuff.
I'm using all my stoic willpower to not yawn right now, so that's just for the record.
You get your yawn on. It's okay.
So we have some good questions. Let's go with Hannah. Let's go with your question, Hannah.
Hi, Jillian.
Hi.
So I have a question surrounding friendships. My question is, how do you know if someone is your friend? And I'll contextualize this a little bit. I find I'm often in situations where, like a work situation, I'm not sure if someone is being friendly out of convenience or because they actually like me. So things like that make me wonder.
Well, I guess if you're okay with me asking you a question, and if you're not, totally fine. But when do you feel like you're being a friend to someone?
I think when I hold space for people to get out whatever they need to get out.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. Like holding space for someone, allowing them to share. Because I think like there is such a whole conversation online about like, are work friends really real friends? Like, are they just relationships out of convenience? That sort of thing. And I think it just comes to your own individual discernment of like, is it okay with me to have someone who is a friend in my workplace and we don't hang out outside of work? Like, does that feel good? Or I'm not sure if your question comes from a place of like, or we're talking at work, but really what I would love is to be able to see them outside of work. And are you comfortable asking for that? Are those the norms in your company? Do you wish they were different? Just like that, it's so different person from person, company from company. And I have had really beautiful friendships in work situations and like really transformative mentorship situations as well. And it's, there's a great book by my friend Shasta Nelson called The Business of Friendship. That's about friendships at work, which maybe might help get clarity on like what your dream friend even really is, and like what's lacking, what's not. Because I mean, I feel like every piece of advice that applies with romantic relationships, a lot of it applies to friendships as well. Of if someone's like, how do I know what kind of romantic partner I want? It's like, well, like, think about it. Like, what qualities in people do you love? Like, what types of people do you naturally gravitate to? If you could be friends with any type of person, like your own self-limiting, like worth stuff aside, who would those people be? How would you feel around them? What would you do? And just like have a little fun exercise with that. This is just me getting off on a tangent, completely not connected to your question, so I'll stop.
No, I like this. Keep going.
But just that, like, I feel like anything around worth that applies with, like with money, with romantic relationships, that same stuff applies to friendship. Like, I had shallow, like a little mean friendships when I was growing up, because I didn't know it, but that was what I thought I deserved. That's what I wanted, or whatever. Like, it wasn't abusive. It was just not ideal. And now that I've like really worked on loving myself more, and I've opened my aperture up to the quality of people that I want in my life, it's just like, all I see is incredible people in the world. Like, that's how my worldview has shifted, but it takes a crap ton of work, like just as much with friendships as it does with romantic relationships, and sometimes more, because we don't talk about friendships in that way. Like, there's not nearly as many books published about friendships as there are about romantic relationships, and that's for good reason. There's a term called a mononormativity, which means, I feel like this is a word you all, like, this is very simple. But it means like a culture that puts romance first, that says like romantic love is the pinnacle of relationships. A mononormativity. I used it in a talk one time so I could sound very smart. But it's true that it's like, oh my God, when you have a romantic partner, then then you've done it and you're set in terms of relational life. I'm like, that's so not true, but that's what our culture teaches us. This is my long rant. I hope it was helpful for you.
It's reminding me actually of Esther Perel when she's talking about, you used to have so many different relationships throughout your community to support you, and now all of those roles are placed onto the one significant other figure in your life. And it's an expectation that's doomed, basically.
Yeah, like, it's not fair to put all of that on one person. It's also not fun to put all of that on one person either.
Thank you very much.
Of course. Thank you for asking, Hannah.
All right. We have about 5 minutes to the hour. Are you okay to squeeze in another question?
Oh, please. I'm just chilling. I'm at home.
Okay, cool. Okay, Amy, you're up.
Hi. Sorry, my camera's off. There's a storm here. But I had a question, which is, let me just go back to it. This is just something that's kind of more of a little bit more of a hypothetical question. Basically, since I live in New York City too, and since COVID, I have been kind of feeling a hunger to meet individuals from the Stoa group in person. Like, it really bothers me that, I mean, it's on one hand an amazing group, but on the other hand, it, like, not having the physical proximity of these people, it's like it's been sad for me. And I was wondering if there could be a shift in the future where people with similar values who meet online might be relocating to better support and align with each other. And I'm wondering if this might be the next step in the game of social cohesion and reliance.
That's beautiful. Like, I'm hearing you say, like, when people meet each other online and they really share values, to take that offline and meet in the physical space. Is that it?
Yeah, like, I'm just trying to think if that, it just feels like that we're in such a time of change, and the idea of values has been so much on my mind and something I'm hearing a lot about. And I'm just wondering if this might be the next step in the future of social cohesion.
I mean, that's my hope, like my dream for it. And sorry, there's sirens going off outside, very New York City. Is that people come out of this time where I hope people are forced to see how important coming together is, because we've been forced to feel the pain of what it's like to not have it. And so after this, to realize, like, what a gift if, like, COVID wasn't a thing right now, to be able to just have a Stoa coffee hour, to have Stoas in person, to have a Stoa, like someone gets at Airbnb and you all meet up, like how gorgeous that is. And so I really hope that people who are gatherers in the future get more and more credit for the magic and the community that they create and that you all create. I'm seeing some folks in the chat who want an NYC gathering, and I say you do it. The museums are open, y'all.
Stoa Art Museum crawl, please. Maybe one day, Hannah. Cool. So let's close out here. Jillian, any kind of closing thoughts or anything you'd like us to know, where we can find you, what you're doing next?
Yeah. So first of all, you can find me at my newsletter, joylist.nyc. But the ways that I make money, connect people right now, I offer courses. My last one was called Better Boundaries. My next one is going to be called Courage and Confidence, because that seems to be the number one thing people in my audience are struggling with right now. It's going to be with my friend Sean Galanos, who runs a company called The Love Drive, who is an incredible relationship coach. So like I'm the friendship, self-love person, and he's the romantic love person, and we're going to be a dream team. And also I do one-on-one coaching for people who feel disconnected from themselves, from their community, and just want a safe place to explore that and work through it. You can find all of that on the Joylist website. I also speak, and I'm looking for more opportunities to talk to teenagers. Like I recently had an opportunity to speak to a group of high schoolers, and it was so fun. So if you have any opportunities for me to speak to high schoolers, like that is my jam.
Beautiful. So I'll include all that on the show notes. And in a moment, I will close out. But Jillian, thanks so much for coming to Stoa today.
You all are lovely. Thank you.
So a couple of events coming up. We have Daniel Schmachtenberger coming tonight. I think it's, what is it? Let me get the time right. Was it 7:30 p.m. Eastern time? The Digital Porch is a part of Sensemaker in Residence 4-part series. And after that, on the same link, Rap Unbattles is going to happen with Tyson Wagner. So rap battles tear people down, rap unbattles, we build them up through compliments and building on, you know, the philosophy that gets spoken. So that should be fun. And then you might like this one, Jillian. Tomorrow we're launching a series at the Stoa, 5:30 p.m. Eastern time, called Communitas Club, where Margaret and I are going to explore different conversational modalities like verbal aikido, nonviolent resistance, circling, restorative circles, all this cool stuff. We're going to bring in an expert and then practice it, and then maybe port in the Stoa and mix them all together and all that, have modality sex. So check that out. And we have tons of events on the website. We have a Patreon and our mailing list if you want to stay connected. So that being said, Jillian, everyone, thanks so much for coming to Stoa today. Mwah. Let's play some lonely music.
Lonely music.
I could know